Season 9 is drawing to a close pretty soon here for League of Legends. For a lot of us, this means that we're going to be grinding rank in order to reach any end of season goals that we might have set for ourselves at the beginning of the year. Personally, my goal is to end Challenger this season. I haven't been able to the last 2 seasons simply because I wasn't able to play my Decay games at the end of season due to school or work. Feel free to let us know in the comments down below what any of your guys' goals are for this end of season. Do you want to end with a certain rank? Do you want to get a certain champion mastery? Do you want to have a certain win rate? Any of these things are legitimate goals. Speaking of goals, one of the best ways to reach your end of season goals is through our website, GameLeap.com. Our website is one of the best learning tools out there, and it features courses both on the 5 fundamental roles as well as champion-specific courses. Buying a premium membership will unlock everything on the site, and it is a very affordable way to get very high-quality content from the best of the best. In fact, we are so confident that you will enjoy our site that if you do not like it, you don't find yourself learning anything for whatever reason, you can get your money back. Now, with this being said, allow me to let you in on a small secret for end of season climbing. Now, you might have already guessed from the title of the video, but the best way to climb towards the end of the season is just to pick a few champions and spam those champions in every single game. However, the end of season changes a few things about the types of champions that you want to be playing. Allow me to introduce you to the Holy Trinity of rules for end of season climbing and picking your champions. Now, at their very cores, these ideas are very simple. The champion needs to be easy to pick up, it has to be an effective pick, and it needs to have a good place in the meta. If these 3 core ideals hold true for your pick, then it will be a very, very effective pick, especially for end of season climbing, and allow me to explain why. The first and foremost, most important thing is the champion needs to be easy to pick up. Now, for those of you one-tricks out there, you don't really need to worry about this. If you are one-tricking something, then you can continue to one-trick that by all means, and you won't need to learn all too many new champions, maybe just 1 or 2. Champions that are very easy to learn are going to be very important to play towards the end of the season, simply because you are not going to have that time to invest hundreds of games towards the end of the season. For this reason, a champion like Riven, for example, would not be good to pick up towards the end of the season because you're not going to have that time to learn her, even if she is one of the strongest champions in the game at the moment. It doesn't matter how well the champion fits the other 2 rules, if it doesn't fit this one, you're not going to be able to adequately learn it, which means you won't benefit from it by the time the season ends. Now, the number 2 rule for picking a champion towards the end of the season is it needs to be a strong pick already. It does not matter if the champion is simple if it just sucks as a champion overall. Now, what I mean by a strong pick is something that is going to be good in solo queue and have solo carry potential. It doesn't necessarily need to be the best, most contested pick, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something that they're playing at Worlds right now. What is important is that the champion needs to be able to consistently perform well in solo queue and solo carry. If it can't do it, it's not going to be great for end of season. This is because when the end of season comes, the attitude in ranked changes a lot. People get very serious, everyone wants to win, you see trolls a lot less often. That means everyone, your team and the enemy team, is going to be doing their best to win, meaning if you have a pick that allows you to solo carry better than the enemy team, then you're going to have a better shot at winning each individual game. Now, the last and most complicated rule to this trinity is the champion needs to have a good place in the meta. Now, what does this mean? Doesn't having a good place in the meta and being a strong pick for solo queue, don't these 2 things mean the same thing? While in some cases they can be close, it doesn't apply to every champion that is good in solo queue for solo carrying. Some champions are good for solo carrying simply because they are always good. They have that top spot in the meta, but that does not go for all champions. The example that I'm going to use here is going to be tanks versus Fiora. Now, tanks are not in the best place in the meta at the moment, but let's pretend for a second that tanks are reigning supreme on the top lane. When this happens, tanks always have solo carry potential, they're relatively easy to pick up, and on top of that, they're in a good place in the meta due to tank itemization or whatever reason. This forces a champion like Fiora to be very, very good in a given meta when she normally wouldn't be into other champions. Fiora can be really bad into bruisers, range bullies, and mages, but if it's a tank meta, none of these things matter. Fiora is the ultimate tank killer, and there are not very many tanks in the game that are able to properly deal with Fiora. Getting back to the tip, you can use picks that are good into the current meta in order to abuse players who just want to follow that meta in order to get their end of season rewards for whatever elo they're going for. Now, by all means, feel free to use these rules to determine any good end of season picks for yourself for whatever given elo you're in. However, I want to give you my picks for each role that you might have overlooked that you can use for the end of season. Before I go into these picks, I want to quickly cover a philosophy that I follow when playing the pick ban phase. You see, the pick ban phase is very important and mostly overlooked, and the higher elo you get, the more important the pick ban is. Now, how I make the most of the pick ban phase is I will have one singular pick in my mind going into pick ban that I want to play. With that pick in mind, I will ban whatever counters that champion the hardest. This allows me to get my hands on that champion without being forced to play any bad matchups if possible. One of the characteristics of the champion that I'm going to have in mind is it needs to have one very simple counter pick. If the champion contains vastly skilled matchups, I'm not going to be attempting to use it. This is because in the case that the champion is picked away from you instead of banned, you're not going to have a good pick in response, and if it's a champion that has a high pick rate, you're not going to be seeing nearly as much success using this strategy. By picking something that has a very simple counter pick, if somebody takes the champion away from you on the enemy team, then you can draft that simple counter pick yourself, and they're going to be unable to carry the game against you because they're not going to be able to do anything. This is the strategy that I have found gives me the best chance of winning, especially during the end of the season. Now, with all of this groundwork laid out, let's get into some of the picks that I have for you guys for this end of season. For top lane, it is very, very simple. My number one pick is Renekton. I banned Jax because Renekton just cannot beat a good Jax, and I use Pantheon as a pick to counter Renekton if it is taken away from me. If Renekton is banned, I'll pick up Fiora because Renekton counters Fiora very, very hard, and Fiora is good into most other matchups. If I go Fiora into Riven, I just dodge. I really don't ever want to play that matchup. It's not fun for me, and I don't feel confident that I can win it 80% of the time. With both Renekton and Jax banned and avoiding the Riven matchup, I'm able to find that I can carry 90% of my Fiora games because the remaining matchups are all going to be tanks or less aggressive bruisers. Again, this takes into account how I play into the meta. There are other things that beat Fiora, like mages or ranged top laners, but most of the time you won't have to deal with these things. It's just how these champions each perform into the meta. For jungle, it's about as simple as it gets. Since you don't really have to worry about 1v1 matchups, there are only a few picks that are going to be good at the moment. My priority pick for the jungle is going to be Kha'Zix. This champion is insanely strong. It has some of the best solo carry potential in the entire game, and on top of that, its ban rate and pick rate isn't anything overwhelmingly high. If Kha'Zix is picked, then I like to play Rengar. Now, Rengar into Kha'Zix is typically labeled as a skill matchup, But the reason that I play Rengar into Kha'Zix is I pretty much only play Rengar into Kha'Zix. I hardly ever play it into any other champion. Now, if both Rengar and Kha'Zix are taken off of the table, then I like to pick Evelynn as my backup pick. Evelynn is really strong and only has a few counters, primarily Rengar and Rek'Sai. Rek'Sai really isn't all that popular, and with Rengar taken off the table, she becomes one of the best carry picks in the game. If all of these are taken off the table, since junglers receive a lot of bans, I will typically just lock in a bruiser like Hecarim or Olaf and try and power farm and take over the game through levels and items. Notice I don't have any tanks on this list. This is because they do not meet that rule number 2. They don't have the solo carry potential that they need. Now moving on to mid lane, I know this one's going to be very heavily biased by myself, and it's going to be different from what a lot of other people would recommend. Typically, when you want to solo carry, the champion needs to be strong in the early game, but that's not what I'm about for mid lane. Another pick that you would typically go for in the mid game, especially for end of season, is something that has a lot of range and a lot of wave clear, because these are good ways to secure a late game and make it so that they're not going to be able to close the game out very quickly. For most people, they would recommend Ahri, Malzahar, champions like that, while banning stuff that's going to snowball really quickly like Qiyana or Talon. If that is what you want to play, by all means do it. I know most people would recommend that, and I'm not saying that it's bad, it's just not how I approach the mid lane. For me, my priority pick in the mid lane, believe it or not, is going to be Kassadin. Now the reason that I have Kassadin is I play a very aggressive style of Kassadin. The reason that I play so aggressive early on Kassadin, even though it's pretty atypical, is because I want to snowball fast. I want an early tier, early Archangels, get Sheen into Lichbane, and be able to impact the map and early fights as much as possible. Since it is an early meta, I transition my Kassadin from a late game Kassadin build to a more early game heavy focus. Using this, I've found that he's actually able to stand up to a lot of early game bullies, including things like Zed, which is insane if you think about it. Now, with Kassadin being my primary pick, I need to keep in mind that AD assassins do usually beat him. So my ban is going to be Qiyana. Simply put, there's just absolutely no way that Kassadin can beat Qiyana. It does way too much damage. It's full physical damage. Kassadin has low armor, doesn't have great HP stats. He just doesn't have a good way to survive it, even if he takes bone plating and armor. If people take Kassadin away from me, I've got 2 response picks that I could go for. Number 1 is Renekton, but that's simply because I have played so much Renekton. What I would recommend for you is the number 2 pick that I go for, which is Talon. If Kassadin is banned, Talon is my go-to anyway, and it's a really good pick into Kassadin. It does, again, all physical damage, has very good base damages, and on top of that, he's able to abuse the fact that Kassadin has bad wave clear, and he's able to roam really early on into the game. Now, for bot lane, this philosophy does not work nearly as well, simply because counterpicking doesn't matter in the bot lane. You're constantly going to be ganked by the jungler, you're constantly going to be ganked by the mid laner, there might be teleport ganks, you have to go all over the place on the map to Dragon, Rift Herald, all sorts of things. So this whole counterpick meta that we're in just doesn't apply to bot lane. For this reason, I'm only going to give you primary and secondary priority picks that you want in the bot lane. For ADC, it's really simple. Pretty much anything will work, but Kai'Sa and Xayah are the queens of the ADC at the moment. They deal insane amounts of damage, and they have really good survivability to deal with those ganks. For support, again, it's going to remain very simple. My pick for support, if you want an enchanter, is going to be Nami, and if you would rather have something tanky, then I would recommend something like Braum, who has very good base values. Now, if you want halfway in between those, Rakan's going to be a really good pick for you. It's halfway between an enchanter, it's got heals and shields, but it still has engage like all these tank supports. Now, the last style of support that is going to be good for end of season climbing at least is going to be the hook supports. The best hook support in the game right now is going to be Pike, hands down. He's also not very hard to play, he's pretty forgiving, so if you can get your hands on him, feel free to play him. Just be aware that his play and ban rate are both very high. I wouldn't recommend playing mage bot lanes at the moment. They're not very good unless you are very talented at playing mages. Keep in mind, these are just my picks. Feel free to develop your own using the rules and the philosophy given to you earlier. Oftentimes, players have different preferences, so matchups that I might find awful, you might actually enjoy and find winnable. If you do have the time, I would highly recommend developing your own list similar to mine. Now, if you don't have the time to develop your own list, that's fine. Feel free to use mine. I'm sure you'll still see a lot of success with it. Now, that is all that I have for you today on how you can be making the most of your end of season climb. For those of you who haven't already, make sure to check out our website, GameLeap.com. There we have hundreds of guides, all done by challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. We have courses both on the 5 fundamental roles, as well as champion-specific courses, so if that is something that interests you, make sure to check us out using the link in the description below. I've checked out a lot of the content on there myself personally, and I can honestly say it is all very high quality. Sign up using the link in the description below and start improving your play. As always, I'm Panther. I hope you learned something valuable, and I will see you in the next one.